Howdy! If you love to gather small pieces of cardboard with pictures of men who play or used to play baseball, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the SABR Baseball Card Show, presented with the blessing of the Society of American Baseball Research, more commonly called SABR. We're here to talk about this wonderful hobby and explore the many facets of collecting cards, both vintage and newer. My name is Mike Eisenbath. I'll be your host. I'm a longtime member of SABR, as well as an active collector of cards, autographs, and memorabilia for more than 50 years. My interests range from old judge cards from the 1880s to ripping packs to find modern cards. We'll talk about all of that on the show. If you like what you see and hear, please like and subscribe. If you want to learn more about the Society of American Baseball Research, please visit sabr.org. Now, on with the show. Welcome aboard, everyone, for the initial episode of the SABR Baseball Cards show. We'll have this both as a podcast and available on YouTube. So wherever you're joining us, welcome in. For this first episode, hopefully the first of many. And today, for this first episode, we've got Mark Armour, who is a longtime SABR member and until last July was a member of the board for numerous years. And I'm sure a name that's familiar to all of you who are associated with SABR. And we've got Jason Schwartz, who is the chairman of the SABR Baseball Cards Committee. I'm Mike Eisenbath. I'm a member of that committee and been a member of SABR for quite a few years. And we're going to talk today about the Baseball Card Committee and about how it came to be, why it exists, what it does. And we're going to use that as our launching pad into a lot of discussions over time. We hope about the great hobby of collecting baseball cards, and we'll probably at some point get into other memorabilia and things like that as well. But we're going to focus today on the baseball card committee. So, Mark, this is your brainchild in a lot of ways, and I know there's a story behind how that came to be. So maybe if you can just share with us a little bit about your collecting journey and tell us a little bit about how the committee came to be.
Sure. Well, I can talk briefly about my own story, but I started collecting when I was a kid, like a lot of people of my generation. When I was just, Tops was the only game in town, and I'd buy packs at the store and I'd get as many cards as I could. And most of my friends, or a lot of my friends, were doing the same thing. And I think the only thing that was sort of different about me, I was just an off the charts baseball nerd, really. I mean, just crazy baseball nerd when I was little. Um, and probably at the expense of learning other things, like but baseball was sort of my thing. And I think the thing that set me apart from a lot of my friends is that they sort of grew up maybe. And so by the time they were like 11 and 12, they were, buying rock and roll records and flirting with girls and stuff. And I was sort of still collecting baseball cards. And I more or less sort of kept going for the most part. And so I was, I think most people who are my age, 65, I think, you kind of grow up as a set person. That's sort of the way I think. I think about, the Topps flagship set. It doesn't have to be Topps, but you just try and complete a set, and that set sort of ends up representing the season for you, both at the time and also now. Um, so that sort of was my journey. And so when I was a young adult and other companies started to come in and I would, sort of buy those sets too. And I have to admit that in the 21st century, I stepped aside a little bit, but only because it got so crazy. I couldn't really keep up with it. Yeah, I just didn't know. And I think set collectors are a little bit of I wouldn't say a dying breed exactly, but I will say that the industry doesn't really lend itself to people that do it that way anymore. Baseball cards have always been important to me, especially vintage cards. Um, And I've been in SABR a long time, and I've been involved in other committees. I started the bio project in 2002, um, and I think that if you had asked me 20 years ago, say, about a baseball card committee, my gut reaction would have been like, well, that's not really like what SABR does. SABR does like academic stuff, it's history, and it's a sort of more. And even though I completely loved baseball cards, I think I sort of separated it in my head. That was kind of like there was the SABR stuff, and then there was the baseball card stuff, and they were sort of a different thing. And in 20, I don't know, 15 or so, I wrote for this website, which was called the National Pastime Museum, that ran for a number of years, not that many, a small number of years, like 2 or 3 years. And I wrote for them, and they approached me in about, sometime in, I'm going to say tw early 2016 maybe, and they said they wanted to know if I had any ideas for like a 10-part series. And they thought like what I should write about would be maybe like the World Series, like write about the 10 best World Series games or and that but they said, but we're open to your own ideas. And I thought about it. I don't know why. I just said like I want to write about baseball cards. That's what I want to write about, right? And I didn't know that there was any other thing like it. So I thought maybe this would be fun for me, especially. So and specifically, I narrowed it down that I was going to write about the Topps monopoly. So 56 to 80, those 25 years, I was going to write 10 articles about that. That was what I sold them on. And they said, go for it. So I did that. And while I was doing it, one of the things I did was, so I'm still heavily involved in SABR. I'm running the bio project. Um, is I sent a note, I think on Facebook, maybe on Twitter, to my community of friends, and just said, for those of you who collect baseball cards, I'm running this series, and I'm interested in your opinions of like what the best set is from that period. Like, what is your favorite set? And I figured that most of the people that I was writing to were going to be like 40 to 60, and therefore they would resonate with this. And I was sort of overwhelmed by how many people actually responded to this, right? There were people that I had known for a long time that if you had told me they collected baseball cards, I would have been surprised. Like I didn't know. And it turns out that a lot of baseball nerds that are between of our age, like between 50 and 70, whatever. A lot of those people collected baseball cards and maybe still have them, or they resonate with them in some way. So people started writing to me, and I'm not kidding. I was like overwhelmed with people because I told them to forward it to their friends and everything. So I got like 200 people that wrote to me about and a lot of people, they broke the rules and they went outside of my parameters. That's okay. Um, but what was funny about it was that so there were 25 possible answers, right? Um, because there are 25 sets. I basically asked like of these 25 sets, and every one of those 25 sets had at least one person that said this was their favorite set, right? So this was in my head now, like, wow, a lot of people in SABR love baseball cards. I mean, I just didn't know, right? So fast forward, I wrote that series, and it was a lot of fun, and I had a blast doing it. And I talked about all the like the league leader cards and the World Series cards, all the cool things that Topps sort of invented in that phase. So that was what the thing was. And whether other people liked it, I can't say, but I had a blast. It was absolutely a blast that I got actually paid a little bit of money to do this. It was fantastic. So 6 more months go by, and like the 2016, the end of this year, and I don't know, I think it just hit me that like I wanted to do something, that I had so much fun doing this, and that the bio project for me had sort of run its course. Like I was just, it didn't need me. There was plenty of people that loved it, and I just thought, I think I'm gonna like do something more fun because, and even my wife would say, like, you had more fun doing this than you had when you were all those bios you wrote. So I knew people on the board. Chris Dial, a friend of mine, was on the board, and I said, I need a co-chair. So if you advance this in the meeting, you and I can co-chair this. So he was, I literally was texting him at a board meeting. So he was at the board meeting. I was at home on my couch. And I texted him and I said, can you put a motion that I want that to start this committee? And he goes, you want me to be still want me to be co-chair? I said, sure. And then like 15 minutes later, he wrote back and said, approved. It's like that's how quick it was.
Yeah.
And so I mean, the thing about this committee, and it's still basically true. It's gotten a little more complicated, I think, recently. Um, Jason and Nick, they've added some stuff, but essentially the core of this committee at the start was a blog, which Sabre had never done before, which was free for anyone to use who was in Sabre or in the committee. There was no litmus test for membership. And people came forward and people did that. And so the other half of that was Twitter. And so we started this Twitter account as well. And I was sort of the person that managed that account. And the main purpose of the Twitter account was to promote the blog, right? Was to say like this is the new blog, this is the new thing. But then this Twitter account sort of exploded too, and like the number of Twitter followers far exceeded the number of people that were actually on the committee, right? Because
Yeah.
there's this huge group of people outside of Sabre that wanted to. And I think we had some success, and I think it continued after I was no longer running the project. Um, Success getting people to into Sabre via this committee, right? They love cars, they join the committee, and then they join Sabre. That was a that's a great outcome. But anyway, so I think that the way I saw the committee was, baseball cards are awesome. We all love them. It is a very big story, and I am somewhat of an expert on a small part of that. And that part of that I think is really cool. But there's also a lot of other stuff that I don't know that much about. And I would tell people like, look, just because I didn't write about it doesn't mean it's not cool. Step up, step up. I know nothing about a lot of these things. And some people did. And, it is a kind of a middle-aged group, I think, middle-aged hobby. We've tried to get younger people, and I think we still want them, but, I think it's definitely not one voice. So anyway, so then I got on the board myself, and then I was elected president of the board. And at that point, I said, like, I probably shouldn't be running this committee anymore. It was probably, I don't know, 2 years old at that point. And Jason, who I did not know prior to this committee starting, was a early star of the committee in terms of writing stuff. He was a great writer, and he was just a really cool part of the community on Twitter. And he was also very energetic and enthusiastic about other people's stuff. So it was a natural thing to sort of reach out to Jason and say, like, would you mind taking this on? And I think Jason's first response was, "Who the hell am I? I've only been in Sabre for like a few years. I can't do this." And that was, of course, wrong. I mean, Jason's usually right, but he was very wrong about that. And then Nick Vosbrink is another guy that was, part of it. Different personality than Jason, certainly, but a vital part of the group, and he has his own sort of niche, I think, in terms of things that are interesting to him. He's really loves the photography and a lot of the technical parts of card making, which is a cool thing as well. So I asked them if they would take it over, and they did. And surprise, surprise, it kept going great after I was no longer part of management. But I've never left it. I mean, it's still a big part of my Sabre life. I still love the committee, and I met a lot of people there. My wife will say like there are people that I consider among my best friends, who I met because of this committee. So if selfishly, if that's the only thing I got out of it, it was well worth it.
Yeah.
And hopefully other people got, I mean, I met Jason there and Jeff Katz I barely knew, and Tim Jenkins I knew a little bit. Nick I didn't know. But you know, on and on. John Racanelli and Bill Perch. I mean, there's just a lot of people who um, you know, I got to know because of this group, and they're still, you know, my people. So anyway, that I don't know.
And that's kind of what Saber does for a lot of us, I think, is brings all the baseball nerds together and we find whatever our common ground is in baseball. And we usually have more than one, you know, swath of ground that is there. And, you know, certainly I've got some of my best friends now are because I collect baseball cards. You know, so we've got that shared thing. So it's a 10-year anniversary of the committee, which kind of makes it a great time for us to roll into this. But it's different now. There's a different kind of energy, I think, now. You know, when you look on the blog, the number of people that have written for it, Jason, is just it, you know, it's staggering in a lot of ways when you scroll down and see the number of authors and the different topics that are there. Like you said, Mark, you know, your expertise is kind of a small part because the hobby just encompasses so much. And I think the blog kind of shows us that. Jason, can you talk a little bit, tell us a little bit about your collecting journey and a little bit what this committee has kind of evolved into and what it is now?
Yeah, definitely. Now, first though, all in good fun, I do have to fact check Mark a little bit. So, if I'd been a Sabre member for a couple of years, I probably wouldn't have been so shy. I'd literally been a Sabre member for 4 months when I became a co-chair of Sabre baseball cards. So that was a little bit daunting at the time. But like Mark says,
Ah, I never would have
now
asked you if I'd known that.
yeah, you might not have known. My Saber origin story, in fact, was I read the blog and I liked it. And just like you alluded to, Mike, I could see kind of down that side panel, oh, it looks like there are a whole bunch of different authors. I wonder what it would take for me to be able to do this. And so I wrote to Mark because his name was all over, card committee stuff. And I just said, hey, could I ever write for this thing? And he said, well, yeah, but you'd have to join Saber. So I was maybe I was going to say one of these rare people who joined Saber specifically to be part of the cards committee and be able to write for the blog. But the truth is, we've actually had numerous other people kind of follow that same path since then. But yeah, I literally knew very little about Saber other than, associating it with Bill James and the cards blog. Those were sort of the two things I knew about Saber.
Well,
But,
to
yeah.
interrupt briefly, I
Yeah.
apologize, but I forgot when not long after this committee was founded, like within the first couple of weeks, some person wrote, I think maybe it was when I might have made an announcement somewhere that said like we started this committee if anyone wants to join the Twitter account, blah blah blah, and one of the people who responded was, "Wow, I had no idea Saber did fun things." I was like,
Yeah, that
"Whoa, that hurts."
yeah. I mean the so I'll definitely get to my, collecting journey or collecting story, but I mean I'll say, and I think Mike you alluded to this as well, that one of the shout out Drew, one of the nice things about the cards committee, one of the nice things about Saber, but one of the nice things about baseball cards, at the end of the day, they bring people together, right? There's so many things that bring people apart these days, but cards almost always seem to bring people together, right? I know some people want to have their cards graded, some people would never have their cards graded. At the end of the day, we're all brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
even if some people like modern, some people like vintage, but I think we have more in common than we have different about us if we collect little pieces of cardboard with people's pictures. So that to me is like, as I look at the cards committee, not only do we have fun, but I would say, and this isn't exclusive to our committee, but we're also a community. In fact, I'd say we're mainly a community than sort of a research factory, right? We do some research. Sometimes I joke that the R in Saber baseball cards is a lowercase r, right? Lowercase research. You're as likely to find an article on why somebody likes the 1980 Mickey Mantle, it's Mickey Mantle, no, sorry, Manny Mota record breaker card, as as you are somebody, breaking some big news about a historic set. So it's largely community, and we do fun things. The I'll back up a little bit, and then I know, Mike, you have an interest in sort of recapping for listeners the different things that the committee does.
Mhm.
But I'm going to go now, dial it way back when, to almost 50 years ago. So for me, my sort of origin story, I suppose, was I didn't really follow baseball. I didn't really collect cards. I actually had a little stamp collection and a little coin collection, but I ended up at a new school, and I never really had skills to make friends, But at the new school, I could tell that at least the boys in my class seemed to always be huddled around little stacks of baseball cards. And so that to me just felt like an in terms of a way to make friends. And so I went out and bought some packs of baseball cards, and I didn't know who anybody was. Even the Dodgers, I grew up in LA. I didn't even really know who the Dodgers were. So I took my cues from Tops, if it said All-Star, or if it had an All-Star rookie trophy, or if it had a record breaker, like there was, 78, Willie McCovey was a record breaker, Lou Brock was a record breaker. So actually you tend to be right more than wrong if you just sort of followed the lead of those, or, eventually I learned you could see how many home runs a guy hit, and George Foster, besides being an all-star, you'd flip his 78 card over and he just hit 52 home runs the year before. So, I kind of learned the game a little, but more importantly, that was how I made friends. All my best friends in elementary school came from trading cards for the 1978 set, and building my set, but building friendships at the same time. One of the things you learn immediately if you're a kid in 1970s LA is Steve Garvey's your favorite player, end of story, period, full stop. So Garvey was my favorite, and for good reason. I mean, there was a lot to like, obviously, but it was like a defining day of my life, a rite of passage to get my first 78 Steve Garvey out of a pack. It took a while, right? But until I got that Garvey, I hadn't really made it. And then once I had that Garvey, I brought it to school in my pocket, which is how you carried cards back then, and showed it to my friends. And, then I was sort of no longer the rookie. I was kind of a full-fledged card collector in the class. And then I dare say probably went so far off the deep end that, fast forward to 1979, and instead of being the new kid, I was probably thought of as like, the guy that liked baseball cards the best. And I was still learning who some of the players were. That took a while to catch up. But yeah, that was sort of how I got going. Um, I kept collecting, like, I got to junior high, and of course in junior high, I can't wait to find, who the card collectors are. And it turned out that it was nobody. Like even my old elementary school friends that I used to trade cards with, like, they were into like girls and music and cars. Like that was pretty much it, right? And not at all baseball cards. So that was a lonely period, but I kept going. Got to high school, kept going. And I actually like kind of twisted a couple buddies' arms into like, picking up the card collecting hobby. So I had a couple guys I traded cards with through high school, a roommate in college that, we both kind of, hit some shows and hit some card shops and tried to hoard 1990 Upper Deck Kevin Moss cards. But then I, like a lot of folks, took a long break. And, I'm gonna put this out there not in a TMI sort of way, but in a way that I think a lot of listeners will resonate with, because I think it's a similar story to a lot of people, is, cards had kind of, fallen to, 25th place in my life. I didn't really think about it much. I didn't really buy cards. And then when I found myself going through a big life change, in my case, it was a divorce. It was sort of a lonely time where I had a ton of free time. And one of the few things that I managed to, sort of have in my new little apartment was a little stack of cards, and I'd flip through them and remember the good old days. And at some point I noticed I had like 14 out of Hank Aaron's 23 base cards, out of his Topps run. And I thought, wow, I wonder if there's still card shows and card shops and all these things. And then lo and behold, I found out you could go on the internet and buy whatever you wanted. And so, I became obsessed about completing my Hank Aaron collection. And, sort of going through that, I discovered the Net 54 forum and, Twitter, hobby Twitter, as it was called, and some of these Facebook groups. And I was at a funny point in my life where I probably had 500 online friends that collected cards and no real life friends that collected cards. And fast forward a bit to 2019 when I joined SABR, managed to find in our SABR Chicago chapter a small collection of guys that were pretty into cards. And we started hanging out and opening packs together and showing off our cards to each other. And now I have actual real life friends. Mark's a real life friend. Mike, you're a real life friend. Right? I don't see you guys as much as I wish I did, but yeah, I mean that I would say I definitely credit Saber with giving me real life friends in the hobby. And of course, for better or worse, right? The more friends you make in the hobby, the more excited you are about your cards. And so, every now and then when I think it's time to slow down, somebody is like, "Oh man, I love that Doc Gooden collection you have," and then of course I think to myself, "Oh well, maybe I should get more." Right? So. Anyways, I touched a bit in terms of my journey, and I know you want to hear a bit about Sabre, but I'll throw it back to you for now and see where you want to take it.
Yeah, so I mean, Mark mentioned that the committee is, I mean, with new people, there are new ideas, and it certainly has expanded to things that no one had, I don't think, probably thought of in at its genesis. The Jefferson Burdick Award, perhaps, pack rips at Sabre National, some of those things. So it is more than the blog now. So maybe can you talk a little bit about the blog?
Hmm.
Is does Twitter, is that still a thing for people to, if they are discovering this show, but they aren't a member of Saber, can they find, Twitter baseball cards with Saber there and talk a little bit about some of those things?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I'll start with the blog. I think a number got, or not a number, but it was thrown out that there's so many people who've written for the blog. We're right about 100 different authors. Not all active at once by any means, right? But over the 10-year history of the blog, we've had about 100 different authors, and it may be in the next 12 months that we'll hit 1,000 articles. I just did the annual report, and I think we're at something like 960 or 970 articles. And so, if we have a pretty good year, we may get to the 1,000 mark, and we've covered so many different things, so many different eras. Things like favorite cards or things like, here's something probably nobody knew about this particular set or this particular card. So the blog tends to be, if somebody's looking for what does this committee do, that's probably the first place I'd send them. I'd say, if you like these kinds of articles, or if you like any of these articles, right? Or if you'd like to write your own articles, this is kind of a typical way to contribute to Saber baseball cards. But you mentioned the online communities. Our two strongest ones today are a Facebook group just called Saber Baseball Cards, and on the Blue Sky platform, it's called Saber BB Cards, just kind of brevity, Saber BB Cards. Twitter, we had a very, very active community, and we sort of let things lapse. There was a stretch on Saber, and I got to be careful what I say now. My son works for Elon, so I don't want to. I don't want to, jeopardize his standing at SpaceX. But there was a stretch, I think, as it was going through this transition of ownership where it felt like where we once had really high engagement. We'd post about a new article on the blog, and there'd be maybe 20 replies and 40 likes and 10 retweets. We'd get like, 2 likes, no replies, no retweets, and it just seemed like my feed, but other people I knew, like the whole feed was like ads for crypto, and the algorithm just seemed to really kind of um, minimize your reach unless you were, sort of a paid blue check mark kind of person. And it just felt like with all the energy we were putting in, we weren't really seeing the community thrive. And so we did kind of, reset up shop on Blue Sky where the numbers aren't as big, but the engagement seems a lot richer. So I don't want to say we won't be back on X or Twitter. And obviously, if we had, it's all volunteer driven. If a member joined and said, "Hey, I would really love to take over that site on X and get that community vibrant again," like I would love that. But as the person that was sort of behind probably 95% of the posting, I just felt like I can't be in all these places at once. I need to just pick one. So yeah, at the moment, I would say Facebook and Blue Sky. One of the things you mentioned as well was the pack rip at Sabre National, and I can confirm it's almost breaking news. But for anybody who's thinking about heading to Cleveland, I can confirm we not only will be doing our fourth annual pack night, but we're actually on the program. It's kind of a late night thing. It's after the ball game, and so it's something like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. So you bring some coffee or Jolt Cola, whatever it takes to keep you awake beyond baseball cards and good company. But that's one of our fun things. That's probably our biggest meetup in terms of numbers as far as a physical meetup goes. But Mike, we met up with about 10 other people for lunch. I think at the last two nationals now that we're in
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah,
Um, the Rocky Mountain chapter, I'll give them a shout out. They have a really vibrant baseball card group within that chapter. These guys get together for lunch. They have guest speakers. I think it's like a monthly thing that they do. I mentioned I've made some buddies through my Chicago chapter. There's maybe, six of us that tend to get together every couple of months and, open packs over pizza and, beer or Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew tends to be the drink of choice, I guess, for a couple of the guys. Diet Pepsi for one, Bill Perch. So yeah, we do that as well. And then something I'm also excited about. One last thing I'll mention about the committee is we just awarded our seventh. It sounds crazy because I think of it as a new thing, and the committee's only celebrating its 10th anniversary. But we just awarded our seventh Jefferson Burdick Award, or I should say, Sabre Jefferson Burdick Award. And that's become an annual award since 2020. Gary Sieradzkowski, who people know maybe for his Infinite Baseball card set or his Outsider Baseball book, or if you're a Sabre member that subscribes to the Baseball Research Journal, all those awesome covers with the cool artwork of Harvey Haddix, or there was one that just came out today with a bunch of pitching grips. That's Gary. So he is our seventh award winner, and it's funny because after a couple years, we thought, are we going to run out of people? Especially because we have a requirement at the moment that the person still be living. Maybe that won't be an eternal requirement, but at the moment that they be living. So, are we going to run out of people? But here we are, 7 years going strong, and I dare say, even when Gary won the award, we had a pretty lengthy list of
yeah,
other really deserving people. In fact, I think the two of you were both at the
yeah.
meeting. We won't reveal any of our deliberations, but we had a pretty long list of other people I think we all felt great about
It
as
was
well.
still an impressive list. So
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to run out of candidates anytime soon.
exactly. Yeah, as soon as the list gets down to zero, I will hand over the reins to some other person. And then when they have nobody to give it to, I'll be like, how'd you screw up the committee? There's no award.
So yeah, I think it's I think that in some ways, kind of like the hobby, we don't know where it's going. But it's I can attest because I go to card shows all the time. It's a thriving hobby. There's no doubt about that. At the National in Chicago this year, there's going to be well over 100,000 people, and that's they're not going to be hurting for people showing up at shows. Like you said, it might be modern, it might be vintage, it might be graded, it might be raw. It doesn't matter. And I think the hobby is still evolving in a lot of ways. So I think this committee still has an evolution ahead of it. Who knows where it goes? I would recommend that anyone who's interested in learning more about cards, because you can always learn, uh, hit the blog, go down that right side. It shows you all the topics that people have written about there. You're going to find something that you didn't know you didn't know. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Can you tell us, so somebody who is not in Saber, how can they go find the blog to begin with? They can also look for that Facebook group, obviously, but if they're interested in not necessarily joining Saber yet, but finding that blog, how can they do that?
So the easiest way is if you just go directly to saberbaseballcards.blog. That's the direct address, right?
Okay.
That gets you right there. What I'll say though, Mark mentioned it was Saber's first blog. And so sometimes what I'll do, I might be looking, for instance, Mark was just sharing with me before we got on how he had written a blog post after Joe Morgan passed away, right? And I thought, oh, let me reread that article. Well, it turns out if you go on Google and you just do Saber blog, Joe Morgan, you're pretty much going to get there at the moment, even though I do think, I know actually, Saber has other blogs now. The Pictorial Committee, the Landmarks Committee have blogs, for example. But I think because we were first and because we have almost 1,000 articles, if you just do a search on Saber blog, you'll literally get Saber Baseball Cards blog is like, your top 10 results at the moment. But yeah,
Sure.
saberbaseballcards.blog is the direct address.
Yeah,
Great. Mark, do you remember?
I think it's probably the case that anybody sort of younger than us, like they don't really know URLs anymore. I think they
For
just
sure.
assume that the search
Yeah,
engine will find anything. Like
yeah,
people will ask me like for my own website, and it's like, if you just Google my name, you'll find it.
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know the address.
Mark, what was the first popular blog post? Do you remember what it was? Something that really just seemed to say, yeah, this is going to be something that's useful to people and important to people.
Well, I don't know. I think my answer might seem self-serving, but like one of the coolest things that I was really fascinated with a particular subject, which I wrote about in my 10-part series a little bit, and which is about the fact that in 1969 and 1968, but 69 especially, which were huge years for me as a kid, ages 7 and 8, that there are a lot of like recycled photos, a lot of people without hats and all this stuff. And that, when you're a kid, you just have no idea what's going on, right? That's just the way the world is, and I don't know why they have these things. Why Joe Morgan has the same picture as last year. I have no idea why, but they must know something that I don't know. Um, I knew literally nothing about this story. And I read something about it in Marvin Miller's memoir about the fact that he had this dispute with Topps, and I actually wrote to Keith Olbermann, who I have had like a brief ex- relationship with over the years, where I've been able to write to. If you write to Keith Olbermann about baseball cards, um, that's like his thing. I mean, he totally loves baseball cards. Like, and and usually if you ask him a well thought out question about baseball cards, I think it makes his day. I mean, he acts like he answers quickly. So anyway, I asked him about it, and he gave me a few stories that he knew, whatever. So I touched about it I touched about this on the 10-part series that I wrote. But then when the committee started, I said, I'm gonna like really go for this. I'm really gonna try and figure this out more. And I wrote to Keith again, and I wrote to a few other people I knew that were involved at Topps and whatever. And anyway, I wrote this article about the Topps, the Players Union, um, uh, I won't say instructed because that's not really fair, but recommended to their members that they not pose for Topps photos because they had a bad deal, right? So don't the way to get leverage is to not pose for photos. And so they didn't pose for photos for over a year, and that's why my childhood was affected by these baseball cards. There's a story that I was having this happen to me and I didn't know why, and I finally found out why, and it became this like huge story in my understanding or caring about the hobby, honestly. And plus, I'm kind of a researcher at heart, so I really like doing it. So anyway, I wrote this story, and it did kind of explode because there are so many people of my age, and when I say my age, I mean give or take 5 years, that know about this set that I think had the same feeling that I did, was like, oh my God, I have no idea why. Because, there was really no, I mean, maybe people like Mike Aaronstein knew, or, maybe Jim Beckett knew, people that were like adults in the hobby that were really serious. But the people like us didn't know anything about what was going on, really. And anyway, so I hesitate to give the answer to an article that I wrote, but it really meant a lot to me. I think I write for myself, like in the sense that I write stories that are interesting to me, and I hope that there are other me's out there. Um, and I think that story still has some traction occasionally, because I think that um, now it's fairly well known, I think, and people have taken it a lot further than me. Like there's actually a website you can go to that somebody put together, which actually lists every single card and where the origin of that card was from the 1969 top set. Some of the photos are like from 1962. Like they really went back to find a card that would work. So anyway, that's sort of an example. And I think the one thing I really liked about it is that it I I hope showed other members of the committee the kinds of things they were allowed to do, right? That it wasn't just like my favorite card. Like you can
Yeah.
go off and do other stuff. And other people, I mean, Jason has done these sort of extraordinary things where he's investigated the poses on the 1933 Gaudi sets, which again it's like maybe that's nichey, and maybe my thing is nichey too, but I think I guess to answer your question, I would say that my favorite posts are things where I just think somebody just really nerds out. They just really go for it. They find something, and they just go deep, and they try and figure something out. And I'm pretty sure that, if I went to a party amongst my friends here in Corvallis, Oregon, that people would look at me like, why the hell did you spend your time doing that? But I but I also know that I've found my people. I've found the people that care.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
so
mean, along those lines, Jason, some of my favorite stuff that you write are those kinds of things where you nerd out a little bit about something, and I'm like, holy cow! I not only would I not have necessarily thought about that, but how did you spend the time, the time that it is dedicated to really
why did
going
you do
deep into some of those
that?
things, it's fantastic. I would recommend anybody just look for Jason's blog posts, and you're going to find some stuff that is just really intriguing. And Mark, I would say that it isn't well known to a lot of people in the hobby, because there are a lot of vintage collectors that are new to vintage, and they notice that. I mean, I sold a 1969 Mickey Mantle not that long ago, and someone said, "This looks just like his '68. Why is that?" And so there are people, I think, that are still curious about that, and because they're fascinating little areas like that. Jason, what's something that you really enjoyed along those lines that people it seemed to resonate with people?
I'll tell you, I have an advantage because I can kind of go in the back door of the blog and I can see the stats. And so I'm going to let you know, Mark wasn't just making a lucky guess there. His article on the player boycott is, I think, one of our four most read articles. And I'll also say that it tends to be one, if this were an academic setting, we'd say, how often is it cited by other publications? That doesn't happen much with Saber Baseball Cards blog. It happens a lot with Saber Bios, for instance. But I think Mark's has kind of traveled, and is cited either explicitly, or if you're reading something else about the set, you can read it and you know that this person read Mark's article. They learned this from Mark's article, whether they say so or not. So Mark's is really well traveled, but also one of our most read. But just to kind of, show the spectrum of Saber baseball cards, that one to me, that is researchy, right? And it educates people on these sets in ways that they might not have known. But when I first joined, I think the article that had the most views of all time was called Butchwax. And it mostly dealt with like, players of about those same years, with crew cuts or, gel in their hair or whatever it was, right? This is before my time, but that obviously took a very different approach. And now this is a more recent article, although, yeah, I'm going to say maybe it was written during the pandemic, so it's been around now. But by far the most read article in the history of the Saber Baseball Cards blog is by my friend Chris Kampka, and it's just called Donruss Diamond Kings Breakdown.
Hmm.
And for anybody that knows Chris, if they're, a White Sox fan that used to watch the games on TV, or now if they're a Cubs fan that watches games on marquee, whenever there's cool trivia, funny graphics, crazy stats, that's all Chris, right? He's like the master of trivia and weird, weird but fun facts. And so, I don't have the article memorized, but for instance, if you wanted to know, the first Donruss Diamond King to wear glasses on his card, that's in there. The Donruss Diamond King with the lowest wins above replacement the season he was named, that's going to be in there. The first two-time Diamond King, that's going to be in there. So it just looks at the Donruss Diamond Kings in just about every possible way, and that is our front runner. I don't know if the Dick Perez movie boosted it or if it's just that people love Chris and his approach to baseball so much.
Well, I
But
think though it
yeah,
does speak to there are younger people now getting, that are collecting now, younger than us at least, because those
thankfully.
cards weren't, if they bought those and they remember them from when they were 8 or 9 years old, they're younger than we are, um, or younger than I am and Mark is. So I think, like I say, who knows what is going to be attractive as far as interesting subjects or what people are enjoying about all of that.
Well,
So
the thing
kind
I
of
really like,
that's a part of. Go ahead,
a,
Mark.
a thing that I really liked about that story, two things. One, um, it is he absolutely nerded out, right? I mean, he sort of I I won't say I wouldn't have spent the time doing that because I probably would have if I happened to have these cards available to me on my desk because I have them all somewhere in this house. But so he did really nerd out, which I'm always up for that. But the other thing I really liked is, and Chris is actually good for this, I think, is these cards are not valuable. They're not chased, right? And I love a good article or even just a good position that someone takes in conversation about some cards that really mean a lot to them that are not $1,000 to buy, right? And so, I mean, Chris's the entire Diamond King set of I don't know how many years they did it, 13 years or something like that, multiplied by 28 players or whatever it is. Take all those people and put them together, that's gonna buy you a good shirt at J.C. Penney. Um, but they're really cool. They're just really cool pieces of cardboard. And I think it's a good reminder. Anytime I see something that somebody just has a passionate interest in, I'm not going to use the term junk wax, but certainly a period where of very overpopulated cards. I just love it. I just think
Yeah,
I thought the whole thing was great.
yeah.
I
So
want to highlight one post though because we've talked a little bit about maybe the age of our readers and I said thankfully there are some folks younger than us, but one of the things that was funny, I was in a Facebook group and somebody, it wasn't a Saber group, but somebody had found this one article that I think hit our site about a year ago. It was on a very old postcard, a postcard that was I think over 120 years old, and most of the players on it would be pretty obscure names at best. You know, the postcard I think had one black player who kind of stood out, in the picture, and the writer who owned the postcard, wrote a little about the this particular player, and somehow this was found by whoever posted in the Facebook group, and they talked about how, wow, really incredible article I just read, right, on this postcard, and everybody's like, oh wow, and the author of the article is getting a lot of love, and I could kind of tell from the comments people were imagining, maybe this is somebody who's researched black baseball for 30 years, that their knowledge goes this deep. And so I was able to put comment and said, I know the author, he's in high school, right? And this is true. One of
Yeah.
our Rocky Mountain chapter members, who I dare say, and Mike, I know looking at your background that what I'm about to say sounds insane. I dare say his card collection might be better than yours, and he's in high school. Like, amazing collection, just an absolute baseball card collecting prodigy, out of our Rocky Mountain chapter. But deep knowledge. Like, you read this piece and you think this guy has been studying the topic for 20 years. And in
Wow.
fact, he hasn't even been alive for 20 years. So, Andrew, on the off chance you're listening, hey, great job.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I do want to start to wrap up a little bit, but one question I wanted to throw at each of you. Um, like actually it'll be one question and one show and tell. Um, Tell me the very first old card you bought. You don't have to go into the deep story, but just the first old card you bought. And then show us a card that kind of means something to you right now, if you got one handy. Mark, we can start with you.
Okay, so I think I mentioned that I was a set guy, right? So my early years, and when I say early, I mean like as a teenager, whatever, it was a lot harder to sort of find old cards or even really new cards other than in packs. If you were trying to put together a 1974 top set, you couldn't like go to a store and like go through hobby boxes and try and find your set. You pretty much had to just buy packs until you were done. So in my the early years of sort of card shop stuff, I was um, say 79, 80, 81, whatever. I would go in and I would try and find the cards that I never got from my childhood, right? Which I still had my cards and I needed maybe 80 cards from this year and I needed 150 cards from this year. And I actually was one of those people that would go to the card shop with like a list and I would try and figure it out. But I the I remember being in a card shop in probably about 1985, 6, 7, somewhere in there. And it was the guy had a lot of vintage stuff, and I didn't really have anything, I would say I don't know, 1962 or 63 or whatever that I probably got from neighbors. And the guy had 1956 cards of Jackie Robinson and Ted Williams in his display. Those were the coolest cards that I could ever seen. And I was a Red Sox guy, and I don't think I had any Ted Williams cards other than as a manager of the Washington Senators. Um, and I just decided I was going to buy these cards, and they were I don't want to shock your listeners, $25 each, which was the most I'd ever spent on a card before. So that tells me it was not 87. It was probably more like 83, 82, something like that. Um, and $25 each, which was, was kind of thing I wouldn't have told people, right? I wouldn't have told my friends that I had done this, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of where it started. And I started to sort of then pick and choose about old cards that I wanted. And for the most part, I was the for until very recently, my my idea of an old card was like was the 50s. Those were old cards. My pre-war card collection was very, very small. It's a little bit bigger now, but uh, the 1950s was to me sort of the bedrock of the pre-mark cards, and
Hmm.
then the my lifetime cards are sort of a different thing. But the 1950s basically are the old cards, and those are the two that I started with right
Yeah.
there.
Jason?
Yeah, well, boy, I wish I had Mark's pocketbook when I was shopping for my first old cards. For me, it was at a card show, I think around 1980. I would have been, 10 years old at the time. and I threw down two whole dollars for a 1961 Sandy Koufax, and that was pretty incredible to me.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
the I wasn't super knowledgeable. It turned out that the card had been like trimmed a whole bunch, which gave it its sharp corners. And I just, when I got home and it was a different size than my other cards, I thought, well, that's just how they did it back then. Shortly after, I think in my next card show, I paid something like a quarter for, if you're familiar with that 1963 set called New Cards Baseball
Mm-hmm.
Scoops.
Mm-hmm.
I got the Carl Hubble, five strikeouts in the All-Star game, and I assumed that the card itself was from 1934 or maybe 1935. That's how little I knew, and I couldn't believe I got that for a quarter. So, but yeah, the Koufax I think would be my first.
The
So
young people listening just have no idea the amount of ignorance that we kind of lived with,
Yeah, we
right?
didn't have
yeah,
the internet.
yeah,
You had no idea. You see a card, you go, "That's cool." No
Yeah,
idea what this is.
yeah.
It's,
Now you can find everything out just by taking a picture and it searches for it.
yeah,
exactly.
So
it's like
yeah,
it's,
I figure for me, any card that's old is one that was made before I was born. So I'm lucky I still collect because my first year of collecting, I was 8 and I was started ripping packs in 1969, which might be the worst set Topps ever had in a lot of ways. A lot of airbrushing or guys without caps and all that, and not a great design. But what happened also in that year, as I discovered baseball cards, that was the first year of Macmillan's baseball encyclopedia, and I got that. And as much time as I spent with my cards, I spent in that encyclopedia. And so I was learning the names of all these old guys. So in 1971, I was reading my grandfather's sporting news, and in the back was an ad from Gar Miller selling cards. And you could write to him with his list of cards he had available with the price on it. And he had to send you that list. And then you mailed back to him what cards you wanted with your money and hope he still had it. So I bought a T206 Ty Cobb, red background Cobb, for $5. The polar bear ad on the back.
I'll give you
So that
six.
was my initiation into what is now just a sickness with T206 cards. But I learned from that, from looking at his list, that I I I would not have known that cards pre-existed my birth, really. And I found out not only did Topps had they been making cards for a while before me, but there were things that I had never imagined, and that opened just an incredible world to me. And so I've been collecting vintage ever since, but also every Topps base card. I've got every Topps base card since '51, except for '65 in the '52 set. So it's still fun though. I put my sets together now, ripping packs with my grandsons. So it's still a lot of fun. So before we go, show me a card. I don't want any show to go off without getting to see a card. Show me a card right now that means something to you, Mark.
okay. So Jason knows me pretty well, and my I'm a baseball historian. Probably that's probably the tag that would go on my grave if there was one. Maybe something about my family. Maybe that would go first. Um, but and my current research obsession is Satchel Paige. And it's been going on for a few years. I've written about him in a few different places, and I'm trying to track down a complete log of his career. I've got almost 2,000 games that I've logged. So this has become a thing that I'm really into, and it's probably the thing I spent the most time on in the last couple of years, other than doing some baseball card stuff with Jason. But so I one of the cards I bought in when I was 40 years ago when I was first going to card shops and had unlike Jason, I wasn't 10 in the 80s. I turned 20 in 1980, so I actually had a job and a little bit of money. So I was able to buy $25 cards. And this card was not $25, but it was it was this card. I asked Jason about this recently, whether I should show this card because um, it has become a little bit cliched. You know, it's been reproduced so many times by Tops and everything. But that card, which I've had for 40 years, um, I feel like I got there before other people, but now like everyone would pick this card, or so many people. It's one of Topps probably most iconic cards. But you know, I'm not gonna mark it off for that. It's still really cool. It's his only Topps card. I still think it's a fantastic, pose. The 53 set is one of the greatest sets ever made, in my opinion.
It's
The
my
53
favorite. Yeah, yeah.
um, and I mean, all those cards from that. I mean, the Minoso, the Irvin, Jackie's card is great. I mean, they're all great. But this, I think he looks just forlorn enough, which I think is sort of how I sort of picture him as I guess he would have been like 45 when that was taken. Anyway, so that's the card I'm going to choose. 1953 top satchel page.
Awesome. Jason, how about you?
Well, I knew I was going to be on the show with Mark, so I'm surrounded by baseball cards, but I thought I'm going to pick one of Mark's favorite players. And this is not quite the card I'm going with. This is, of course, the 1979 Topps, Luis Tiant, one of Mark's very favorite players. I dare say maybe his second favorite pitcher of all time, possibly.
Was he? I would say he's my favorite player that I actually experienced in
That you
my
get to
life.
watch.
Yeah.
Um,
So, the hardcore viewers of a Saber baseball card show, no doubt know that in 1979, Topps worked with Burger King on a Yankees set. And one of the fun things about the Yankees set, because it came out later than the Topps set, right? The historians out there know Tiant went to the Yankees in November of
too
1978.
soon. Too
Too,
soon.
too late. Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. That's bad memory here. But anyways, too late for Topps to get it right in their 79 set. But in the Burger King Yankees set, you
Oh,
get
yeah.
Tiant on the Yankees, and this is a major hobby flex because I'm not just showing the Tiant. I have the Tiant unopened pack,
Oh,
the Tiant
oh,
unopened pack here.
yeah.
So that's mainly in honor of Mark, but this is something my friend Rich Ray hooked me up with at one of our little baseball card opening things we do here in Chicago, and it was so cool to have it unopened. I just decided I'm going to keep it that way. So
That is
Back
awesome.
back back in the heyday of Twitter, our good friend Tim Jenkins would love to sort of post cards deliberately to poke the bear of various people. And with me, anytime he never lost the opportunity to post any picture of Louis Tiant as a Yankee. That would be the thing that would kind of he knew would so he's from Seattle, so I would post a lot of early Milwaukee Brewers cards as a way to get him back. But
or
um,
you
So,
would post Tiant on the Red Sox, and then he might write Yankees legend.
that's true. Yeah. No, he's pretty funny.
so I'll get ready to wrap it up with my card that so I was a sports writer for decades, and as part of that, I did a lot of Cardinals history stuff. And in the course of doing that, I fell in love with the story of Billy Southworth. Um, one of my just one of my favorite characters, people throughout baseball history, and his story is incredible. So I have a 1922 W501 uh, card of it's a strip card of Billy. But what I love most about this card, it's one of my favorite cards ever made. He's posing with his son, and that's part of his story. His son was a fighter pilot in World War II and was killed in the war. And it wrecked Billy. It really messed him up. And it, understandably so. As a father with a son, I can only imagine. So having that memory encased in that moment for all time on a baseball card, uh, to me, that's part of why I love this hobby because there are things like that all over the place. Um, so thank you guys so much for spending time with us. I hope this is the first of many. Um, I'm going to give you my folks my email address. It's M Eisenbath, so it's my last name with my first initial at gmail.com. Please send me any ideas you have for some future shows. We'd love to hear that. And if you can't contact me for whatever reason, you'll be able to get Jason through the blog. And we hope that this committee just uh, goes incredible places for the next 10 years. Mark, thank you for uh, coming up with the idea and shepherding it through those early years. And Jason, thanks so much for all your efforts. It's fantastic. I think you've both made the hobby more enjoyable for a lot of people.
Kind words.
And
Thank you, Mike.
it's a hobby that I do. I think I don't think we've seen the best of this hobby yet because I think people are discovering it every day.
Beautiful.
It's very nice. Thank you.
So, and my parting words always are going to be uh, no one has a better collection than you until you buy your next card. So, thanks everybody. We appreciate your time spent with us and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.